let's do Chapter 1 vocabulary. So now we're starting the second of the 4 parts of the course, where we're talking about, now that we've figured out how to gather data, how do we look at and describe the data we've gathered. So first of all, what is data? Data is information about, well, let's start with variable. A variable is anything that describes the things or people that were studied, anything that can take multiple values. Now those values don't have to be numbers. It can be like, what's your favorite food? You know, there's several different possible answers to that. So favorite food is a variable. Data is information about that variable or information about a variable. So that we have gathered. It's not the truth about the whole population, it's the data we gather, the information we have. That data can come in 2 sorts. It can be qualitative or quantitative. So for quality would be, what's your favorite food? For quantitative, it could be, what's your GPA? One is measured as a number, one is different categories, right? Now, the distribution of a variable is how often each sort of value or result shows up. Now this can either be in the data from the sample or the data of the population. Distribution describes how often each result occurs. And we're going to be talking a lot about the shapes of distributions. That's really a lot of what this course is about, so that's a key word there. Okay, now let's talk about association versus independence. If one variable's result is related to another variable's result in a particular way that I'll describe, then we have an association. Let's take favorite movie and gender. Let's say that I give you 3 options for what you prefer. Do you prefer action movies? Do you prefer romantic comedies? Or do you prefer other movies? And if it's not an action movie or a romantic comedy, I guess that could include anything from Lincoln to Pitch Perfect. Biopics, whatever. So now there's no question in my mind that men will answer action movies more often than women, and that women will answer romantic comedies more often than men, and I have no idea who will pick the other category. Me, probably. So the question of association versus independence. If there's no relationship at all between how often men pick the different categories and how often the women pick the different categories, then we would say that movie preference is independent of gender. All right? There has to be no relationship between, if I tell you that, I need a gender-neutral name, something that could take either gender. I don't know. I'll make one up. No, I can't make one up. Okay, let's make something up. Let's pick something Israeli. Tal, yes. Tal is that. So I tell you that Tal likes swimming. If that gives you, Tal is a gender-neutral Israeli name. If the fact that the person likes swimming, maybe you look at data on people who like swimming and you find that women like swimming more often than men, and you say, aha, Tal is probably a girl. Then swimming is not independent, liking swimming is not independent of gender. If there's any sort of clue that knowing one thing lets you know another, then those 2 variables are not independent of each other. Association is when there is an association, that's when the variables aren't independent. For example, there's an association between movie preference, between how much you like, how likely you are to like action movies and your gender. People often confuse independence with mutually exclusive. For example, women are more likely to be Clinton voters than men. And people often make the mistake, at least last year in my class, they made the mistake of saying, well, political party preference is independent of, it's independent of gender because there are women who like Trump also. That's not getting independent, right? That there's an association. It's just not mutually exclusive. Mutually exclusive means if you're in one category, you cannot be in another category. So the correct answer would be there is an association between gender and political preference. Although the categories are not mutually exclusive. It's not like there are no women who support Trump. That would mean that being a woman and supporting Trump would be mutually exclusive. So that's a whole different thing. People are always confusing association with mutually exclusive, and they're saying if it's not mutually exclusive, then it's independent. That's not right. So let's talk about ways to describe qualitative data. So categories. You could create a pie chart. Let's create a pie chart for gender and how. No, not for gender. Pie chart for how many people like movies of different preferences. Of different types, I mean. So let me get several colors here. People who like action movies. Most. People who like romantic comedies most. And people who like something else most. There, it's a pie chart. You can display categorical data, right? Because their answer wasn't 1, 2, and 3. It'd be really weird to have like a pie chart where you have, everybody who answered, who said they have 1 sibling, 2 siblings, 3 siblings. It's rare. It is true that pretty much any numeric variable could be shoved into categories and called categorical data. If I take IQ, right, intelligence quotient, average intelligence is 100, and average IQ is 100, we could subdivide people into groups. People with IQ below 85, people with IQ between 85 and 115, and people with IQs above 115. Yeah, we can divide them into categories and then treat it as categorical data. So occasionally that will happen. Keep your eye open for that. Just because it's measured in numbers doesn't mean it has to be quantitative, or doesn't mean that it has to be treated quantitatively. You could create a pie chart for like IQ also if you categorize them in groups. Next, you can create a bar graph. Bear in mind, bar graph is specifically for qualitative data. We will call it something else when we look at it as quantitative data. So here's my, here's this, here's other, people who like other sorts of movies, people who like action movies. No, that's significantly smaller. And while in a pie chart it may be hard to tell which bars are bigger than other bars, when you look at it down here, you probably can see which one of these is bigger. So, so generally bar graphs are more usefully descriptive than pie charts. Pie charts is when you're dealing with pieces of a whole. And actually I'll get to two-way tables in a little while. There's also a graph that goes like, you can also create a bar graph that instead of, a pie chart that instead of being round, goes from like 0% to 100%, and then you could like break off groups and be like, and I forget what this is called exactly. You can look it up in the textbook, or you can ask me in class and I'll look it up. Oh yes, that's it. It's a segmented bar graph. This is a segmented bar graph, and these will sometimes come in handy. For example, if I compare one segmented bar graph with another, and I say, this is in the United States, this is in Europe, then you can look at this and say, oh, looks like Europeans are a little bit less action-oriented and a lot more romantic-oriented. So that's a segmented, let me write that over here, segmented bar graph. I might have that name wrong, the bar part, look it up. But segmented makes sense, it's in segments, right? From 0 to 100% of everybody. So sort of similar to a pie chart that way. And I'm going to pause here so that I have time to draw. No, why? You can just fast forward when I'm done drawing this 2A table. See, with the 2A table you can actually do something very different. While most of these only let you see one thing at a time, although the segmented bar graph did a decent job of showing us, comparing one group against another, two-way tables can do something pretty cool. Pretty well, too. There we go. All right. Here we go. So this is a 2A table comparing gender and what sort of movie preference. I can write that in. So what we see here is that a total of 200 men and 100 women are surveyed, for a total of 300 people surveyed. And men, 30 men said they like action movies, 20 men said they like romantic comedies, 150 men said they like other movies, and here's the distribution for women also. If I was going to describe a conditional distribution, that means for the men, specifically, for the condition of being man, what's the distribution? And then we just look at this row. Or for the condition of being someone who likes an action movie, what's the distribution of people? Well, 30 of them are men and 2 of them are women. So you might see the word conditional distribution here and there. That means for a specific condition. As opposed to a marginal distribution, which means the distribution of overall how many people like action movies, romantic comedies, or other. Well, here's the marginal distribution for movie preference. It's on the margins, it's just on the edge of the, of the total rows. Okay, so let's think for a second about what this shows. Does this show any association between movie preference and gender? Well, 30 out of 200 men like action movies, that's 15%. 15% of men prefer action movies, whereas only 2% of women prefer action movies. Since those aren't the same, there is an association. Remember the word association, as opposed to independence. There is an association between liking action movies and gender. How about liking other things? Is there an association between liking neither of those things and gender? 150 out of 200, 3/4 of men like other things that are neither of those, and 75% of women also. So there is an association between liking neither of those and your gender. As opposed to mutually exclusive, there aren't any mutually exclusive categories here. If these two women also preferred romantic comedies, now being a woman and liking action movies, those are mutually exclusive categories. That still doesn't have anything to do with independence. In this situation, romantic comedies are not independent. There is an association between gender and probability of liking romantic comedies most. And there still isn't an association between liking neither of those two categories and gender. Yeah, so that's a whole bunch of ways to describe categorical data. Mutually exclusive, action movies and women. Independent, other and gender. And association between action movies and gender. Yeah, that's pretty much that.